The paralyzed boy was found in a ditch, until a woman screamed, "That's my brother's son. He died a year ago." The morning sun was already cruel by the time Preacher John Whitmore saw the boy. He had been walking the dusty road to Bitter Creek for 3 days, his horse having thrown a shoe outside of Mesquite Springs. The desert stretched endless in all directions, broken only by the occasional Joshua tree standing like a prayer against the empty sky. His water was running low, his boots were wearing thin, and his faith felt as parched as his throat. Then he saw the small form in the ditch. At first, he thought it was a dead animal. Something about the way it lay so still, so perfectly motionless against the red earth. But as he drew closer, his heart began to pound with a different kind of recognition. The shape was too small, too human, too wrong for this empty place. The boy could not have been more than 7 years old. He lay curled on his side like he was sleeping, but his eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. His clothes were torn and dirty, hanging loose on a frame that had grown too thin. His dark hair was matted with dust and something darker that the preacher did not want to name. "So," Whitmore whispered, kneeling beside the ditch. The boy's eyes moved. Just barely, just enough to focus on a man's face. But no sound came from his lips, no movement from his small body. Whitmore reached out slowly, the way he might approach a wounded animal. His fingers found the boy's wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. The child was alive, but something was terribly wrong. When Whitmore tried to lift him, the boy's legs remained limp, unmoving. "What happened to you?" the preacher asked, though he expected no answer. The boy just stared. His eyes were the color of creek water in winter, clear but somehow empty. They held a silence that went deeper than words, deeper than sound. It was the silence of someone who had seen the world break apart and had no way to put it back together. Whitmore gathered the child carefully in his arms. The boy weighed almost nothing, like he was made of dust and air. There was no struggle, no cry of pain or fear. He simply lay in the man's arms with the same terrible stillness he had shown in the ditch. The walk to Bitter Creek took 2 hours. The boy never moved, never made a sound. His breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes fixed on the sky above them. Whitmore found himself talking to fill the silence, telling stories from the Bible, humming old hymns his mother had sung. But the words felt hollow in the desert air, swallowed by the vastness around them. Bitter Creek was not much of a town. A main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small church with a bell tower that had never held a bell. The people who lived there were hard people, worn down by drought and disappointment. They watched Whitmore walk down their street with curious eyes, but it was not until Mrs. Henderson saw what he carried that the quiet was broken. She was hanging laundry behind the boarding house when she looked up and saw the preacher walking past. Her eyes fell on the boy in his arms, and the wet shirt she was holding dropped to the ground. "Merciful God," she whispered. Other people began to gather. The blacksmith stepped out of his shop, his leather apron still tied around his waist. The storekeeper's wife appeared in her doorway, wiping flour from her hands. Children peeked out from behind their mother's skirts. Whitmore stopped in the center of the street, feeling the weight of their stares. "This boy needs help," he said. "I found him out on the desert road. He can't speak, can't move his legs. He needs food, water, a doctor if you have one." The crowd murmured among themselves, but no one stepped forward. In places like Bitter Creek, strangers were trouble more often than blessing. A sick boy meant questions, meant problems they could not afford. Then Sarah Mae Colton pushed through the small crowd. She was a woman of maybe 30 years, with dark hair pulled back and dress sleeves rolled up from washing dishes at the saloon. Her face was sharp and weathered, marked by the kind of sorrow that never quite heals. She had been walking home when she heard the commotion, coming to see what had disturbed the afternoon quiet. When she saw the boy, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes went wide with something that looked like terror and hope mixed together in equal measure. She took one step forward, then another, her gaze fixed on the child's face. "No," she breathed. "No, it can't be." She was close enough now to see clearly. close enough to take in every detail of the boy's features. His dark hair, the shape of his nose, the way his eyes caught the light. Her scream split the afternoon like an axe through wood. "That's my brother's son," she cried, her voice breaking with disbelief. "That's Thomas. That's my nephew Thomas." The crowd stirred uneasily. Several people stepped back, as if the boy might be contagious with whatever impossible thing was happening. "Ma'am," Whitmore said gently, "this boy was alone in the desert. He's hurt, he died." Sarah May's voice rose higher, edged with hysteria. "Thomas died a year ago. The fever took him. I buried him myself, right there in the churchyard. I put him in the ground with my own hands." She pointed a shaking finger toward the small cemetery at the edge of town, where wooden crosses marked graves in the hard earth. Her face had gone white as bone. "I watched them lower his coffin," she continued, her words tumbling over each other. "I threw dirt on top of it. I said goodbye. He's been dead for a whole year." The boy in Whitmore's arms turned his head slightly, his empty eyes focusing on Sarah May's face. For just a moment, something flickered there. Recognition, maybe, or memory trying to surface from some deep place. But he still did not speak. The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by Sarah May's cries. People whispered among themselves, crossing themselves, backing away from what they could not understand. In a place where life was hard and death was certain, the impossible was more frightening than any drought or Indian raid. Whitmore looked down at the boy, then back at the woman who claimed to know him. The child's face was thin and hollow, changed by whatever had happened to him. But now that she had spoken, he could see it too. The resemblance was there, buried under suffering, but unmistakable. "Sarah May," he said quietly. "What was your brother's name?" "William," she whispered. "William Colton. He lived here with his boy after his wife died. They caught the fever that winter, the one that took so many. William died first, then Thomas 3 days later. I buried them both." She was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "I buried them both in the same week. How can he be here? How can Thomas be alive when I put him in the ground?" The boy's eyes had not left her face. In their depths, Whitmore thought he saw something stir. Not words, not movement, but something deeper. A recognition that went beyond memory, beyond the year of silence and separation. "I don't know," the preacher said honestly. "But he's here now, and he needs our help." Sarah May stepped closer, her hand reaching out but not quite touching the boy. "Thomas," she whispered, "is it really you, baby boy?" The child's lips moved, just barely. No sound came out, but the shape they made looked like it might have been a word. It looked like it might have been Sarah. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. The wind picked up, stirring dust devils in the empty streets. And in the center of it all, 3 people stood facing an impossible truth that would change everything they thought they knew about life, death, and the space between them. Whatever had happened to Thomas Colton, whatever had kept him alive when he should have been dead, the answers would have to wait. Right now, there was only the moment, and the boy who had returned from whatever darkness had claimed him, silent as the grave he should have been sleeping in. The boarding house felt too small for all the fear inside it. Preacher Whitmore had carried Thomas up the narrow stairs to Sarah May's room while the crowd gathered below, their voices rising like smoke through the thin walls. Mrs. Henderson had reluctantly allowed it after Sarah May pressed $2 silver in her palm, but her face showed she regretted the decision with every step. The boy lay on Sarah May's narrow bed, his small body barely making a dent in the worn quilt her mother had sewn 20 years ago. His breathing was steady but shallow, and his eyes remained fixed on the ceiling beams, following patterns only he could see. Sarah May knelt beside the bed, her hands trembling as she reached toward his face, then stopped. "I keep thinking if I touch him, he'll disappear," she whispered. "Like morning mist when the sun gets high." Whitmore dipped a cloth in the wash basin and began cleaning the dirt from Thomas's face with gentle strokes. The boy did not flinch or respond, but his eyes tracked the movement. Under the grime, his features became clearer, more familiar. The resemblance to Sarah May's dead brother was unmistakable now. "Tell me about the day he died," Whitmore said quietly. Sarah May's voice caught in her throat. It was February, the coldest winter we'd had in 10 years. The fever came through town like wildfire, taking the young and the old first. She traced her finger along the edge of the quilt, not looking at the boy. William caught it from one of his customers at the store. He was always good to people, always helped when folks couldn't pay. The sickness took him fast. She paused, gathering strength for the harder part. Thomas held on for 3 more days. I moved into their little house to take care of him. He was burning up with fever, calling out for his papa, sometimes talking to people who weren't there. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. On the 3rd night, he just stopped breathing. I held him until morning, waiting for him to start again. But he never did. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising rain that might not come. The afternoon light filtering through the single window was growing dim, casting long shadows across the small room. Whitmore continued cleaning Thomas's arms and hands, noting every scrape, every mark on the thin skin. The boy's wrists bore circular scars, old but not healed completely. His ankles showed similar marks. Someone had tied him up, and recently. "These are rope burns," the preacher said, his voice hardening. Sarah May looked closer, her face pale. "Ghosts don't get rope burns." "No," Whitmore agreed. "They don't." The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, followed by Doc Morrison, a thin man with kind eyes and steady hands who had been treating the people of Bitter Creek for 15 years. "Sarah May," Doc Morrison said softly. "Mrs. Henderson told me what happened. I need to examine the boy." She moved aside reluctantly, still afraid to take her eyes off Thomas for too long. The doctor sat on the edge of the bed and began his examination with practiced gentleness. He checked the boy's pulse, listened to his breathing, tested his reflexes. "His legs," Sarah May said. "He can't move them." Doc Morrison ran his hands along Thomas's legs, pressing gently, watching for any response. There was none. "The muscles are weak, but not wasted," he said. "This isn't old damage. Something happened to him recently." He noticed the rope marks too, and the way Thomas's ribs showed too clearly through his skin. "This boy has been kept somewhere without proper food or care, and he's been restrained." His voice grew grim. "This isn't sickness, Sarah May. This is cruelty." From downstairs came the sound of more voices, more people gathering. Word was spreading through Bitter Creek like spilled water through dry earth. Everyone wanted to see the impossible boy, the child who had returned from the dead. "They're saying he's a ghost," Mrs. Henderson said from the doorway. "Old Pete Watkins thinks he's been sent by the devil to test our faith. Some of the women won't even come near the building." "And what do you think?" Whitmore asked. Mrs. Henderson studied Thomas's still form. "Ghosts don't bleed, do they? And this boy has cuts that are still healing." She pointed to a scrape on his forehead. "Whatever he is, he's been hurt by living people." Doc Morrison finished his examination and stood up. "I need to speak with you both downstairs," he said, glancing meaningfully at Thomas. The boy appeared to be sleeping now, his eyes closed for the first time since they had found him. They gathered in Mrs. Henderson's small parlor, where the sound of their voices would not carry up to Thomas. The doctor's face was troubled. "That boy has been through something terrible," he said. "The rope marks suggest he was tied up for weeks, maybe months. He's severely malnourished, and his legs." He paused. "I think someone may have given him something to keep him weak. Laudanum, perhaps, or something worse." Sarah May's hand flew to her mouth. "But why? Why would someone do that to a child?" "I don't know," the doctor admitted. "But I know this. He's not a ghost, and he didn't rise from any grave. Someone has been keeping him alive, and they treated him badly." Through the window, they could see more people gathering in the street. Some carried torches, even though it was not yet full dark. Their faces showed the kind of fear that could turn dangerous quickly. "They want to see him," Mrs. Henderson said. "They want proof one way or the other. He can't handle a crowd like that," Doc Morrison said firmly. "The boy is in shock. He needs quiet, rest, and gentle care." Upstairs, they heard a sound. A small cry, barely audible through the floorboards. Sarah May was up the stairs before the others could move, her feet flying over the wormwood. Thomas was sitting up in bed, his eyes wide with terror. His mouth was open as if he was screaming, but only that small, wounded sound came out. His thin hands clawed at the quilt, and his whole body shook. "Thomas," Sarah May whispered, sitting carefully on the bed. "It's me. It's Aunt Sarah. You're safe now." The boy's wild eyes found her face. For a moment, recognition flickered there. His lips moved, shaping a word that had no sound behind it. "Sarah," Whitmore said quietly. "I think he's trying to say your name." She reached out slowly and took one of his small hands in both of hers. His skin was cold and rough, scarred by whatever had happened to him during the lost year. But it was real, solid, warm with life. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Thomas's grip tightened on her fingers. His eyes searched her face as if he was trying to remember how to trust, how to believe in safety again. The fear slowly faded from his expression, replaced by something that might have been hope. "He remembers you," Whitmore observed. "Some things," Sarah May said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But I can see in his eyes that he remembers other things too. Bad things. Things that happened after." She could not finish the sentence, could not say the words that would make real what had been done to this child who should have been sleeping peacefully in the ground. From outside came the sound of the crowd, growing larger, their voices carrying through the thin walls. Someone was calling for the preacher to bring the boy out, to let them see this miracle or devil for themselves. "We can't keep them away forever," Mrs. Henderson said practically. "This is a small town, and people talk. By morning, everyone will know he's here." Thomas had settled back against the pillows, but his eyes remained alert, watching the adults around him as if he was trying to understand what was happening. His silence was not the silence of the dead, but of someone who had learned that words were dangerous things. "Whatever we do," Whitmore said, "we need to protect him. He's been through enough." Sarah May smoothed the boy's hair, marveling at its softness, its reality. "The question is," she said quietly, "protect him from what? From people who think he's a ghost? Or from whoever had him all this time?" In the growing darkness outside, the voices of Bitter Creek rose and fell like a restless wind, carrying questions that had no easy answers and fears that ran deeper than superstition. And in the small room above it all, a boy who had been lost began the long journey back to finding his voice again. 3 days passed before Thomas spoke his first real word. Sarah May had barely left his side, feeding him spoonfuls of thin broth and watching him sleep in fits and starts. The boy would wake suddenly, his eyes wide with terror, reaching for something that was not there. She would hold his hand and hum the lullabies her brother William had sung to him, and slowly the fear would fade from his face. The town had grown quieter as the initial shock wore off, but people still crossed themselves when they passed the boarding house. Some left small offerings on the front steps, wildflowers, pieces of cornbread, a carved wooden horse. Others made wider circles around the building, as if whatever had brought Thomas back might be catching. On the third morning, Sarah May was washing his face with a warm cloth when he suddenly grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak but urgent, his eyes fixed on hers with desperate intensity. "Men," he whispered. The word came out cracked and dry, like something pulled from deep underground. Sarah May's hand stilled. "What men, baby?" His lips moved silently for a moment, as if he was testing each word before he let it free. "Bad men. They took me." The cloth fell from her fingers into the wash basin. Preacher Whitmore, who had been reading quietly in the corner, set down his Bible and moved closer to the bed. "Where did they take you, son?" he asked gently. Thomas's eyes darted between them, checking to make sure they were real, that they would not disappear like so many other things had. "Dark place. Underground. Couldn't see the sky." Sarah May felt something cold settle in her stomach. "When, Thomas? Where did they take you?" "The night I was sick," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Papa was already gone. I was burning up, couldn't think right. They came in the window." His small hand touched his throat, as if remembering something that hurt. Put something over my face. Sweet smell. Then nothing. The room fell silent except for the sound of Thomas's labored breathing. Sarah May's mind raced back to that terrible February night, to the moment she had found him still and cold in his bed. She had been so grief-stricken, so desperate to believe he was at peace with his father. "But you were dead," she said, though the words felt foolish even as she spoke them. "I checked for breathing, for a heartbeat. There was nothing." Thomas nodded slowly. "The medicine made everything slow. Made me look." He struggled with the word. "Dead." Whitmore sat on the edge of the bed, his face grave. "Who were these men, Thomas? Did you know them?" The boy shook his head. "Strangers. They had a wagon, boxes in the back. One was tall with a scar here." He traced a line down his cheek. "The other was fat, smelled like tobacco and whiskey." "What do they want with you?" Sarah May asked, though part of her did not want to hear the answer. Thomas was quiet for a long time, his eyes focused on something beyond the present moment. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow, empty of feeling. "They needed a dead boy. For their tricks." "What kind of tricks?" "Magic shows. They would go from town to town, telling people they could bring the dead back to life. They would put me in a box, tell everyone I was dead, then make me wake up." His small fingers plucked at the quilt. "People would pay money to see it happen." The full horror of it began to settle over Sarah May like a cold blanket. "How long, Thomas? How long did they keep you?" "Don't know. Long time. Months and months. They kept me weak with medicine, so I couldn't run, couldn't fight." He looked down at his useless legs. "Something they gave me made my legs stop working right." Whitmore's hands clenched into fists. In all his years of preaching about human sin, he had never imagined cruelty this calculated, this purposeful. "They fed me just enough to keep me alive," Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger now that the words were coming. "Kept me in a box most of the time, except when they needed me for the shows. I learned not to cry, not to make noise. They hurt me when I made noise." Sarah May was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she imagined this child suffering while she mourned at his empty grave. "Oh, Thomas. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Aunt Sarah." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of forgiveness that broke her heart all over again. "You thought I was dead. Everyone thought I was dead. How did you get away?" Whitmore asked. "I got too sick. The medicine, all those months of it, made me weak all the time. I couldn't do the tricks anymore. Couldn't wake up when they wanted me to." Thomas's voice grew smaller. "They said I was broken. No good anymore. So they just left you? Put me in the back of their wagon, drove out into the desert. The fat one said maybe I would die proper this time. Maybe that was better." He looked up at Sarah May. "I thought I was going to die too. I wanted to for a while." The silence that followed was heavy with grief and rage. Sarah May smoothed Thomas's hair, marveling at how he had survived, how he had found the strength to keep breathing when everything had been taken from him. "The night you found me," Thomas said to Whitmore, "I heard footsteps on the road. I thought they were coming back. I was scared. I would never hurt you, son. I know that now." Thomas's eyes, which had been so empty when they found him, now held something that looked like trust. "You have kind hands." Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway with a tray of food. Real food this time, not just broth. Thomas's eyes widened at the sight of bread and butter, a piece of apple, a cup of milk. "Take it slow, boy," she said, but her voice was gentler than usual. Word of Thomas's story had spread through the boarding house, and even her practical heart had been moved by it. As Thomas ate with careful, deliberate bites, Sarah May found herself wrestling with the truth he had given them. Part of her had wanted to believe in miracles, in divine intervention, in something greater than human suffering. It would have been easier to think her nephew had been touched by God's hand than by the cruelty of evil men. But this was the truth, ugly and painful as it was. Thomas had not risen from the dead. He had survived something worse than death. He had endured months of captivity, of being used as a thing instead of treasured as a child. And somehow, through it all, his spirit had not been completely broken. "Will your legs get better?" Sarah May asked. Doc Morrison, who who had been listening from the hallway, stepped into the room. With time and care, possibly. The damage isn't permanent, just the result of whatever they were giving him. His body needs to heal, to remember how to be strong again. Thomas nodded, accepting this news without complaint. He had learned, in the hardest possible way, that some things could be endured. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Something I need to tell you." Sarah May took his hand. "What is it, baby?" "They're still out there. The bad men. They have other children." His voice grew urgent. "I heard them talking before they left me. About going to new towns, finding new kids to take. Kids whose families won't look too hard for them." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Somewhere out there, the men who had stolen Thomas were still practicing their evil trade, still destroying lives for profit. "We have to stop them," Sarah May said, her voice hard as steel. Whitmore nodded grimly. "Yes, but first, we make sure Thomas is safe. And we help him remember what it feels like to be loved instead of used." Thomas finished his apple and looked around the room at the 3 adults who had chosen to care for him. For the first time since they had found him, something that might have been a smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I remember some things," he said softly. "Good things. From before. Papa reading to me. You making honey cakes on my birthday. The way the sun looked coming through her kitchen window." Sarah May squeezed his hand. "We'll make new good memories, Thomas. As many as you want." Outside, the sun was setting over Bitter Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The truth had been told, painful as it was, and now came the harder work of healing. But for the first time in a year, Thomas Colton was truly home, surrounded by people who would fight to keep him safe, no matter what shadows from his past might come looking for him. The first snow came early that year, dusting the streets of Bitter Creek like flour on a baker's counter. Thomas watched it fall from the window of Sarah May's room, his thin fingers pressed against the glass. It had been 6 weeks since Preacher Whitmore had found him in the ditch, 6 weeks of slow healing and careful steps towards something that might one day be called normal. "It's pretty," he said, his voice stronger now but still soft around the edges. Sarah May looked up from her sewing. She had been letting out one of her old dresses to make a coat for him. His child's body was filling out again with regular meals and gentle care. "Do you remember the snow from before? When you lived with your papa?" Thomas nodded slowly. "He used to make snow angels with me in the yard behind the store. Said they were messages to Mama in heaven, telling her I was growing up good." It was the first time he had mentioned his father without sadness clouding his eyes. Sarah May set down her needle and thread, marveling at how far he had come from the broken, silent boy they had found. The door opened quietly, and Preacher Whitmore stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. He had taken to visiting every day, bringing books to read aloud and stories to tell. Somewhere in the weeks of caring for Thomas, he had stopped being just a passing stranger and had become something like family. "How are the legs today?" he asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. Thomas pulled back the blankets to show his thin legs, which had grown stronger each week. With Doc Morrison's help and careful exercises, he had progressed from complete paralysis to being able to move his toes, then bend his knees, then support some weight when standing. "I took 3 steps yesterday," Thomas said proudly. "Sarah May held my hands, but I moved my own feet." "That's wonderful, son." Whitmore's eyes crinkled with genuine joy. "Soon you'll be running around town, causing all kinds of trouble." The boy's smile faltered slightly. "Will people still be afraid of me? Well, I can walk again." It was a question that had haunted all of them. The people of Bitter Creek had slowly accepted that Thomas was not a ghost, but many still crossed themselves when they saw him. The story of his resurrection had been replaced by the truth of his captivity, but some truths were harder to believe than miracles. "Some people might be," Sarah May said honestly. "People fear what they don't understand. But the ones who matter, the ones with good hearts, they'll see you for who you are now." Thomas considered this, his young mind working through concepts that should have been too heavy for his years. The bad men, they wanted me to disappear, to not be real anymore. "But you are real," Whitmore said firmly. "You're here, you're healing, you're growing stronger every day. That's more real than anything." Through the window, they could see the afternoon light fading, turning the snow from white to blue. Thomas had grown to love this time of day, when the three of them would sit together and talk about small things: the weather, the books Whitmore brought, Sarah May's plans for a vegetable garden come spring. "I've been thinking," Sarah May said carefully, "about what happens next, when you're fully well again." Thomas's hand found hers automatically, a gesture that had become natural over the weeks of healing. "What do you mean?" "I mean where you'll live, how we'll make a proper family." She took a deep breath. "I've been saving money from my work at the saloon. Enough to rent the little house on Oak Street, the one with the blue shutters. It has 2 bedrooms, a kitchen big enough for a table, a yard where you could play." The boy's eyes widened. "You want to live with me? Like a real family? More than anything in the world." Her voice was thick with emotion. "If you want that too." Thomas turned to Whitmore. "What about you? Will you stay in Bitter Creek?" The preacher had been wrestling with this question for days. He had intended to move on weeks ago, to continue his circuit of small towns and lonely churches. But somewhere in the process of helping Thomas heal, he had found something he had not realized he was looking for. "I've been talking to the church elders," he said slowly. "This town needs a permanent preacher, and I think I need a permanent home, with people who matter to me." "You mean us?" Thomas asked. "I mean you. Both of you." Whitmore's voice was rough with feeling. "I never had a family of my own. Never thought I needed one. But these weeks with you two have shown me what I was missing." Sarah May wiped away tears that had started without her noticing. "So we'll be together? All 3 of us? If you'll have an old preacher around, getting in the way and telling too many Bible stories." Thomas laughed, a sound that still surprised him when it came out. "I like your stories, especially the ones about David fighting giants." "Speaking of fighting," Sarah May said, her voice growing serious, "there's something we need to discuss. About the men who took you." Thomas's joy faded slightly, but he did not look away. In the weeks of healing, he had grown braver about facing hard truths. "Sheriff Martinez from Roswell came by while you were napping," she continued. "He said there have been reports of similar crimes in other towns. Children disappearing, families told they died of sickness, bodies in coffins that were never the right children." "They're still doing it," Thomas said quietly. "Taking kids." "The sheriff thinks so. But he also said your story, your testimony, might help catch them. If you're willing to help when you're ready." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching the snow continue to fall outside. When he spoke, his voice carried a strength that had not been there months ago. "I want to help," he said. "Other kids shouldn't have to go through what I did. They shouldn't have to learn how to disappear." Whitmore reached over and placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You're a brave boy. But remember, you don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. We'll face it together. All of us," Sarah May agreed. "Whatever comes next." As if summoned by their words, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway with a tea tray and news from downstairs. "Sheriff Martinez is back," she said. "He's got someone with him from the territorial marshal's office. They want to talk to the boy, if he's up for it." Thomas looked at Sarah May and Whitmore, drawing strength from their presence. "I'm ready," he said. The 3 of them made their way downstairs together, Thomas walking slowly but steadily between his 2 guardians. In the boarding house parlor, 2 men in official clothes waited with serious faces and careful questions. But Thomas was no longer the broken, silent boy they had found in the desert. He had Sarah May's fierce love and Whitmore's steady faith surrounding him. He had learned to trust again, to speak his truth, to take one step at a time toward whatever future awaited. The men who had tried to make him disappear had failed in the most important way. Thomas Colton had not just survived, he had remembered how to live. And now, with his new family beside him, he was ready to make sure other children would never have to learn the lessons he had learned in the dark. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in clean white silence. But inside the warm parlor, surrounded by people who had chosen to love him, Thomas began to tell his story once more, not as a victim this time, but as a survivor who had found his way home. The questions would be hard, and the hunt for his captors would be long. But he was no longer alone in the darkness. He had learned to walk again, not just with his legs, but with his heart, step by careful step, toward a future where broken things could be made whole again.